Welcome to Headstones and Microphones Founder Stories, where we use AI to step into the past through a researched first-person simulation of history's most visionary founders. I am your host, Calvin. While we've added some creative storytelling, our goal is to inspire your own study of these trailblazers. Now, let's meet our guest. Hey everyone, get ready because today we are traveling back in time to talk with the man who turned a dairy farming region into the sweetest place on earth. He went from absolute bankruptcy to building a global chocolate empire and an entire model town. Please welcome the legendary chocolate king himself, Mr. Milton S. Hershey. Milton, it is an absolute honor to have you on the show.
Calvin, thank you so much for having me.
The pleasure is all ours. Let's dive right in. When you first conceived of your business, the world was a very different place. What was the exact moment you realized society was moving in a direction only you could see? And how did you convince the early skeptics?
Well, Calvin, for the longest time, I was actually in the caramel business. My Lancaster caramel company was doing wonderfully well, shipping caramels all over the world. But in 1893, I visited the Chicago World's Fair. Right there in the exhibition hall, I saw some German chocolate-making machinery in action, and it hit me like a lightning bolt. I looked at that machine and thought, caramels are just a fad, but chocolate is something permanent. Everyone around me thought I was losing my mind when I decided to sell my successful caramel business for $1 million just to gamble on chocolate. My close advisors told me I was throwing away a fortune on a luxury that everyday people couldn't afford. Milk chocolate back then was a Swiss secret, very expensive and rare. But I told them, I don't want to make chocolate just for the wealthy. I am going to find a way to mass produce it so everyone can enjoy it. I didn't spend much time trying to convince the skeptics with words. I knew the only way to prove them wrong was to roll up my sleeves and build the factory.
That is incredible. Talk about trusting your gut. But leaving behind safety to build something entirely unproven is a massive gamble. What did your life look like the day you decided to go all in? And what was the core belief that gave you the courage to take that first step?
The day I decided to go all in on mass-producing milk chocolate, my life was actually quite comfortable because of the caramel success, but my heart was pulling me back to where I grew up. I decided to build my great chocolate factory right in the middle of the rolling hills of Dairy Township, Pennsylvania, where I was born. People thought I was crazy to build a massive, modern factory in the middle of cornfields and dairy pastures instead of a big city. But I had a core belief that fresh milk was the absolute key to making high-quality, affordable milk chocolate, and those pastures were full of cows. My upbringing taught me the value of hard work and thrift, and I had this simple conviction. If you give people a quality product, that is the best kind of advertising. I knew that if I could master the recipe using the local farmer's milk, the world would beat a path to our door.
And they certainly did. But in the absolute beginning, when you had no data, no capital, and no blueprint, what was the one truth you held on to that everyone else around you dismissed?
When I first started out in the candy trade as a young man, way before the chocolate company, the one truth I held on to was simply that determination and a good product would eventually win out. My father was a man of big ideas but very little financial success, and we moved around constantly. I only had about a fourth grade education. When I started my very first candy shop, people looked at my lack of schooling and my family's background and figured I didn't have the blueprint for success. But I believed that a person's willingness to work hard and treat others fairly, following the golden rule, was worth more than any fancy business degree. I kept my head down and focused on learning the craft, trusting that quality candy would speak for itself.
You definitely proved that. But it wasn't a straight line to the top. Long before your company became a household name, you hit a wall where everything nearly collapsed. Take us back to that first major failure. What went wrong, and how did you find the willpower to restart?
Oh, Calvin, I hit more than just one wall. My journey was paved with failures. After finishing my apprenticeship in Lancaster, I opened my first candy business in Philadelphia in 1876. I worked myself to the bone for 6 years, but high costs and debts caught up to me, and I went completely bankrupt. It was heartbreaking. Then I traveled out west to Denver, where I learned from a candy maker that using fresh milk made caramels last longer and taste better. Armed with that new knowledge, I tried starting candy businesses in Chicago and New York, and guess what? They failed too. By the time I came back to Lancaster, I was broke. My credit was ruined, and many folks looked at me as a three-time loser. But I knew the secret of fresh milk caramel was too good to give up. I started making caramels in a small warehouse and selling them from a pushcart. Hard luck and misfortune test your mettle, and I just refused to let those early failures define me.
That resilience is unmatched, Milton. Innovation often looks like madness to contemporaries. Was there a specific product, philosophy, or strategy you were utterly convinced would work, but the public initially rejected or ridiculed? How did you respond?
When we started building the chocolate factory in the countryside, the whole strategy was ridiculed. Experts said a factory of that scale belonged in a major shipping port or a bustling rail hub, not surrounded by cows. Then came the challenge of the recipe itself. We didn't have a blueprint for mass-producing milk chocolate using fresh milk. The Europeans kept their processes a strict secret. For months and months, we suffered through endless trial and error. The milk would sour, the chocolate would separate, and the mixtures would ruin. It looked like a total disaster, and insiders whispered that I was wasting my fortune. My response was just stubborn persistence. We kept adjusting the temperatures, the condensing process, and the mixing times until we finally got it right. By the time that first smooth, affordable chocolate bar rolled off the line in 1900, the public didn't ridicule it anymore. They bought every single bar we could make.
Persistence pays off. Behind the legendary name was a human being facing immense pressure. How did you shoulder that burden without letting the vision splinter?
The pressure could be immense, especially when we were constructing the town and managing hundreds of workers. I always felt a deep personal responsibility for the people who moved their families out to our valley. For me, the secret to shouldering that weight was keeping my eyes on the bigger picture. I didn't measure my success in dollars, but in the usefulness of those dollars for the benefit of my fellow men. My wonderful wife, Kitty, was my absolute rock and shared my heart for helping others. When the pressure got heavy, I would focus on the community we were building, the schools, the parks, the comfortable homes for the workers. Knowing that the business was a vehicle to lift up the lives of thousands of people gave me a peace of mind that kept the vision completely clear, no matter how heavy the daily burdens became.
Speaking of the people around you, who were the very first people, beyond your immediate family, to buy into what you were doing? How did you convince early workers or customers to trust an entirely unproven concept?
Back in the early days of the Lancaster Caramel Company, when my credit was absolutely terrible, I desperately needed money to buy raw ingredients to fulfill a large order from a British candy importer. I went to the Lancaster County National Bank, and the bank cashier took a chance on me. He was so impressed by my determination that he actually backed the loan with his own personal signature. That trust saved the business. When the payment for that British order arrived, I was so excited that I ran all the way down the street to the bank to pay him back, with my candy apron still on. For the early workers at the chocolate factory, I convinced them by showing them that I was willing to work right alongside them, and by promising to build a town where they would be proud to live. Trust is built by actions, not just words.
I love that image of you running down the street in your apron. Can you take us to the exact moment where you felt the momentum shift? What was the specific milestone, contract, or breakthrough where you realized, we aren't just going to survive, we are going to change everything?
The turning point that made me realize we were going to change the entire confectionery industry was the launching of our wrapped milk chocolate bars at the turn of the century, closely followed by the introduction of the Hershey's Kiss in 1907. We had created a distinct, delicious sweet that was wrapped beautifully and sold for just a nickel. Seeing the orders flood in from every corner of the nation, and realizing that everyday working-class families and children could now enjoy a treat that used to be reserved only for the wealthy, that was the moment. We weren't just surviving. We had completely democratized chocolate.
You didn't just build a company, you built a distinct culture and philosophy that outlasted you. In the early days, when it was just a handful of people in a room, how did you instill that standard of excellence or service?
From the very beginning, I treated my workers as family. I believed that employees who were treated with dignity, paid fairly, and given a comfortable environment would naturally take pride in their work. In those early meetings, I always emphasized that we should deal with one another not as classes, but as brothers. I instilled the standard of excellence by making sure everyone knew that our name on the wrapper stood for absolute integrity. If a batch wasn't perfect, we didn't sell it. When the workers saw that I cared just as much about the quality of their lives and the quality of our product as I did about the profits, they adopted that same standard of excellence as their own.
History books often flatten a person's life into a neat, polished narrative. What is the biggest misconception people have about your journey, your character, or how your company was actually built?
I think the biggest misconception is that everything came easily once the chocolate factory opened, or that I was just a natural-born businessman who made a fortune overnight. People see the town and the success, but they flatten out the years of grueling work, the constant financial panics, and the plain old trial and error. I was an ordinary man with very little schooling, who just kept moving forward through a lot of dark, uncertain days. There was no magic formula, just a stubborn refusal to fail and a reliance on the hardworking people who stood by me.
Building an empire always requires a steep personal cost. Looking back at the entirety of your life, what was the hardest sacrifice you had to make for the sake of your vision? And was it ultimately worth it?
The hardest part of the journey was the toll the early years of constant moving and financial failure took on my family life, and later on, the fact that my beloved wife Kitty and I were never able to have children of our own. It was a deep, personal, quiet sadness for both of us. But because of that, we decided to turn our personal sacrifice into a beautiful blessing. In 1909, we founded the Hershey Industrial School for orphaned boys, giving them a home, an education, and a real chance in life. We came to consider those boys as our very own family. Before Kitty passed away, and later before my own days came to an end, we made sure to leave our entire personal fortune and shares of the company in a trust to fund that school forever. Looking back at the thousands of children's lives that have been changed, every single trial and sacrifice was absolutely worth it.
That is a truly beautiful legacy, Milton. If you could send a single sentence back through time to yourself on the very first day you started this venture, knowing every trial, triumph, and heartbreak that awaited you, what would you say?
I would tell my younger self, believe in your work, never stop when failure hits, and remember that the true value of your success will be measured by the good you do for others.
Milton, this has been an absolutely incredible conversation. Before we sign off, do you have any closing remarks about the interview or the stories you shared that you would like to leave with our listeners?
I just want to encourage everyone listening to remember that difficulties show us what we are truly made of. Don't be afraid of hard luck or setbacks. Use them to build your character. Treat people with kindness, follow the golden rule, and put your heart into whatever you build. Calvin, thank you again for this wonderful afternoon. It has been an absolute joy to share these memories with you and your listeners.
Thank you so much, Milton S. Hershey, for sharing your time and your incredible wisdom with us today. What an inspiring look at how resilience, quality, and radical generosity can truly change the world. And that wraps up another conversation from Beyond the Grave. Thanks for joining us on the Headstones and Microphones podcast, Founder Stories. Remember, legends may die, but their stories never do. Please help spread the word by sharing and following the pod.